There are few games out there that do everything perfectly. Hardspace Shipbreaker is not one of them. However, it does do something that I think is truly unique. So unique, in fact, I made this very review to highlight it. And it also does something that's truly baffling. Before I get ahead of myself, let me get into the review proper. Developed by Blackbird Interactive, the studio who made Minecraft Legends and Homeworld 3, and published by Focus Home Interactive, Focus Home Entertainment. Hardspace Shipbreaker is a sci-fi job simulator in the same vein as something like actual job simulator titles, where instead of cutting lawns, you cut apart spaceships to reduce, reuse, and recycle their materials because we didn't learn the first time. You are a shipbreaker, a person who specializes in breaking down spaceships and harvesting the high-value items that they might be carrying. You are stationed at Salvage Yard Morgan in orbit around Earth, working for the LYNX Corporation, slowly paying off your debt to the company. But working for the LYNX Corporation is more along the lines of indentured servitude rather than gainful employment. When a new worker starts, their DNA is harvested for when they inevitably make mistakes.
A genetic extraction will destroy your original body. Beginning extraction now. Extraction analysis and backup complete. Thank you. Beginning spare generation.
With the Everwork program, an employee's DNA can be used to make a clone of them to continue working even after death. Aside from that, the intro itself lets you know that this is not just going to be another job simulator.
Into the yard to earn his wages working hard. I pray to the stars and heaven above to return my daddy to those he loves. If there comes a time when he and death meet, bless the next cutter that takes his seat.
When I heard the cutter's prayer for the first time, I knew I was in for something different. The tone that the intro cutscene sets sticks with you throughout the entire experience. Running on Unity, Hardspace Shipbreaker is set in the 24th century and you work at a salvage yard orbiting Earth, slowly cutting away ships and harvesting the valuables inside. Everything is big, blocky, and industrial looking. Nothing is as refined or smooth as things you'd find in other sci-fi titles. Everything all the way down to the ship design is grounded in reality, and I can appreciate that. This is a very realistic aesthetic choice that the game devs has settled on, and the game's better off for it. There aren't many unique sounds in the game, but I think that's by design. I will get to that in a second. One of the most notable sounds is the sound of your cutter either melting joints away or cutting right through a panel. Sometimes you'll have to use your grapple tool to manipulate objects, and it's the most sci-fi sounding thing in the game. Well, the second most anyway. Your spacesuit also talks to you and plays a short tune whenever you meet a salvage goal.
Salvage secured. Applying credit.
Now, I think the reason for the sound being so minimalistic is by design. because this is a work environment with tons of hazards. For those of you who don't know, I'm a nurse who used to work in the ICU, and in that environment, sounds aren't good. Hearing a machine alarm at 4 in the morning because a patient pulled out their ET tube is not a fun time. Neither is being set on fire, getting electrocuted, or being crushed. And the alarm lady will be sure to tell you that damaging LYNX property is against company policy.
Electrical damage. Please limit compulsion to avoid damage to sensitive LYNX equipment.
Space is quiet, and when you're working, the only sounds that matter are the ones that can save your life. All in all, the sounds work, but eventually they will get repetitive. The music is the reason I've wanted to review this title for the past several months. Not because I think it's like this amazing, groundbreaking work that rivals that of Mozart or Bach, but because it makes the most out of taking inspiration from a subculture. Let's listen to a few tracks before I explain why. Country music does not belong in a sci-fi setting, unless you're a blue-collar worker. Blue-collar work can be best defined as boots on the ground, back-breaking work. And the people most associated with it are coal miners, oil rig workers, and construction workers. Most of these career fields can be associated with the South, and the South is associated with country music. Originally being from a small town in West Virginia, right in the middle of coal country, I picked up on this tone immediately the first time hearing the music and could easily tell who the target audience was. This is the tone the opening cutscene set, and it's carried all the way to the end of the game. This is hard, sometimes grueling work done by people who take pride in that work, and the music is a big piece of conveying that. I've combed through my entire library looking for another game that sets a tone this well, with an almost unrelated musical genre, and I was only able to find one. I don't think there are many other titles out there whose music completely shifts the tone like this. Speaking of the tone shift, sometimes you'll get hit by something and your radio station changes.
Just bought some shoes, they light
The habitat or hab is unfortunately the only thing that's visually filled with character, and I'll get to why when we get to the ships. The hab is your living quarters, complete with the necessary amenities and one hell of a view. This is where you read emails, pick your favorite wall decor, and upgrade your equipment. It all looks appropriate and fitting. What about the salvage yard? Seeing it light up for the first time is pretty neat, and honestly it never gets old. This is your main work area where you'll send components and materials into their respective bins. Parts that can be disassembled and repurposed go into the processor. Equipment and cargo go into the barge, and metals that can be melted down and remolded go to the furnace. Everything's color coded, blue, green, and red respectively. The game also has a day and night cycle. That statement doesn't make perfect sense when you're in space, but there are definitely points where things get dark all of a sudden when something blocks the sun. It's a little thing, but it adds to the experience. Now for actual levels, they come in the form of ships. These can range from civilian transports, cargo haulers, or research vessels. Here's where the problems begin. There are only 4 base models to each ship, with 1 to 3 variants of each one. Cargo can be in different places, fuel lines can run longer, and maybe the ship's engine relies on a different reactor. Which is all well and good, but many things on these ships don't change enough for them to feel like a unique experience. experience. My biggest problem with it is that it's almost too monotonous. Yeah, I like the Javelin class ships and their variants, but after the 5th fucking one, I'm sick of looking at them, and this can be applied to every ship. So expect the same level of burnout you'd experience at a real job. Another issue is that more often than not, the ships are in relatively perfect condition. There aren't many with signs of damage that could feed into a larger narrative. I mean, they could have at least given us half a ship with a black box recording of what happened before it lost the other half. Now, there are a few ships that are already damaged, but not by much. Since we're talking about ships, it's time to move on to breaking them down. These are more than just ships, they're puzzles, meant to be solved in one certain order or another. All the ships are designed with an exterior hull that mainly consists of materials meant for the processor. Most of these pieces are detached when you melt an anchor point with your cutter. After all the anchor points are destroyed, the pieces will begin to float, and then you can move them into the corresponding bays. You can either manually move them into position, force push them, or use the most satisfying item in the game, tethers. With tethers, you can chain multiple objects so they can all be hurled into their respective areas, or use several of them to move a large, heavy piece. The inside of the ship is where you'll find most of the materials and high-value items destined for the barge. These are items that more often than not require you to do things in a specific order so that you can harvest them without destroying them. I'll go over a very common obstacle to give you a better understanding of what I'm talking about. Airlocks are the first puzzle you'll encounter. The interior of a ship is often pressurized, and you'll have to depressurize it to open it up. If you shift that pressurization too quickly, you can send valuables flying against the walls of the ship or even into yourself. The key here is to get inside the ship, find an atmosphere regulator, and activate it. Sometimes there will be more than one of these and multiple airlocks and pressurized rooms, so it'll take a bit of deliberation to figure it out. Sometimes there is no good way to depressurize the ship, so you can do what I did. You just say fuck it and melt every door in the way. Once you've gutted the ship of all the airlocks, ECUs, reactors, and anything else valuable, you're left with the husk of the ship, and most of the time you can just send that whole thing into the furnace. Each ship has a salvage goal that rewards LYNX tokens, which can be used at the workbench in the hab to buy upgrades to your suit or new toys like the demo charges. Your gear will wear down with use, and you'll have to repair it every now and then. For the cutter, if it's damaged, you'll have to let it cool down more often when using it. Your thrusters can feel a bit more floaty when they're not at 100%, and honestly I could barely tell a difference in some equipment being damaged. It's never really an issue if you buy repair kits often, so it's kind of a pointless mechanic. So your demo charges, tethers, and oxygen have a very limited supply until you upgrade them. That being said, a lot of the early game involves you only getting a few things done at a time before going out to the hab platform to restock. In the early game it can be a bit annoying, but at least you can upgrade your oxygen timer. Speaking of timers, every level excluding most tutorial levels in the campaign are on a 15-minute timer, meaning when you step out onto the yard you only have a limited amount of time to work on the ship whether you like it or not. Now this doesn't mean that the ship is lost forever, you can continue it on the next day. I think the reason this timer exists is to progress the story by forcing the player back into the hab. You see, the way the story progresses is by the player level. Some days you'll get a greeting of some sort that may or may not progress the story when you start your shift.
Morning, crew. Let's hit them salvage goals.
Yeah, hey, Weaver, do you know when this administrator gets here?
Should be here any day now. But remember, no need to worry.
Other days it's silent when you cut the ship apart, and you can go multiple days in a row without any story development because you haven't hit the required level. I'll elaborate on it a bit more in the story section, I just felt like now would be the best time to point it out. After finishing the game, you're taken back to the menu where you can pick up where you left off, start a new game to challenge yourself with a limited amount of respawns, or no respawns, or race, otherwise known as the weekly rapid acquisition competence exercise. It's a fun little mode where every week you compete against other players' times in breaking down a ship, with work orders demanding certain goods to be salvaged. You may be thinking to yourself that there must be a huge modding community making their own ships for people to break down, and I hate to be the one to tell you this, but not really. There are people out there making their own ships and putting them into the game, but it's nowhere near the amount of people that modded Skyrim, which really is a shame because this title could have had a lot more replayability with that kind of support. The main campaign only has a few ships that you have to salvage. All the other ones are essentially free play. It's a huge missed opportunity, and I'm honestly baffled by the decision not to include official mod support or a build your own ship mode. Is it just me, or are more and more devs intentionally not adding Steam Workshop support? Are they worried that modders will do a better job than them, or is it just purely something that I don't understand? My first time through the story took almost 20 hours before I reached the end, with this review playthrough taking about 17 and a half. Looking at either of those two times, it would seem that there's a good amount of content to go through, but as I just explained, there's really not. They honestly could have knocked 5 or so hours off the average runtime of the game, and I don't think anyone would have noticed. It's not like there's a grand story with deep lore to explore here, it's just breaking down ships.
Here is the machine. The machine is gone. Do you understand? No. No, I don't think you do. Here is man, all mankind, spreading out, spreading, like roots of a tree through endless stars. And there is the machine. The machine is going to stop the roots.
What? Sorry. There was a final pass that was obviously missed with how the air pressure system works in the game. I grabbed this footage after I finished the game to see if there was anything substantial after the credits. This section was exposed to space, and when I melted down one side of it, it treated that compartment as if it weren't depressurized. This is honestly unacceptable. After a few instances of messing with the pressurization, it's easy to see how it could potentially ruin a salvage. Not only that, but it's a major part of the game. So when something this integral to the puzzle that the game presents is inconsistent, it can leave players frustrated and confused as to why things happened. That's the last thing you want in a video game. You don't want the player feeling punished for something that they don't have control over. I'm almost positive there was another instance of this happening during my playthrough, but I'm not hunting down that footage. While we're talking about the wonkiness of pressurization, I had a not so frustrating experience with the physics engine when depressurizing an area. You can't tell from the footage itself, but looking at the ship from the outside, you can tell something went wonky, which is honestly just hilarious. It didn't break anything and didn't prevent me from salvaging the rest of the ship, so not too bad. However, I could see this sending someone else to Alpha Centauri. Other than that, sometimes dialogue boxes wouldn't pop up and the game would occasionally freeze to load those said dialogue boxes. There's not much of an actual story here. The main plot point here is corporations versus unionization, but it's nothing new. We know corporations are greedy and will violate any human right they can get away with in the name of number must go up, even if that means people get hurt along the way. Before actually getting into spoiler territory, you should know that you're not an active participant in the story. It kind of just happens in the background via dialogue. Sure, you'll get pulled to the side occasionally for some exposition, but you're not really doing anything. Another thing that bothered me about the story is that characters didn't have enough time to shine. You get brief introductions to them and pick up on their personalities fairly quickly to figure out what trope they fit into.
Sound off, everyone.
Hey, Rook. Name's Liv. I was the worm until you showed up, so thank you. Now I get to do the hazing. What are you talking about? We don't do that. Welcome aboard. Don't listen to her. I'm Dee. Kai, your mic's still messed up.
How about now?
Better.
Oh, hey, I'm Kaido.
There's not enough banter in between them for you to really understand them as characters. Now granted, this could be by design since this is a workplace and you should be working instead of talking.
This is Hal. Just wondering, how much time is spent chatting on average in a day here?
It's just the crew checking in with one another from time to time. No harm in that.
Well, as you know, the LYNX Employee Handbook says that avoiding chatter makes profits fatter.
But there's just too much dead air while salvaging that could have been used for a bit of story sprinkled in. I mean, there's some fun lore drops here and there that they could have expanded on and they just didn't.
3, tops. These types have the attention span of a gopher. They'll move on pretty quick.
What's a gopher?
One final note I'll add is that there's a lot of breaking the gameplay loop in service of the story. Typically, when you're done for the day, you get a loading screen, wake up on your bed, and start a new day. However, on several occasions, you'll have to answer a phone call from characters just to listen to dialogue. This is the kind of stuff that could have been said out in the yard instead of you just sitting here waiting on them to stop talking. There's even a secure channel that can be used so the company doesn't listen in on you and they still only use it at inconvenient times.
Hey, don't worry. This is a closed channel. There won't be a log.
Coupling that with a story that only progresses when you level up is a surefire way to get the player disinterested in the story. Which, to be fair, nobody is playing this for the story, so I doubt it's an oversight, but the gameplay gets too repetitive to keep players invested and the story doesn't even try. There are text and audio logs defined, but those just don't work in this kind of game. Not when it's already struggling to keep your attention with its repetitive gameplay. Anyway, go to here if you don't want spoilers, but I promise you, you're not missing much. While working as a shipbreaker, one of the crewmates, Lou, is unhappy with a contract she willingly signed and is trying to get the crew on board with the union. Not long after that, the CEO of LYNX sends out a message to all shipbreakers that administrators are being sent to every salvage team to watch for union activity.
Listen up, folks. Let me introduce you to Hal Rhodes.
No need for introductions, Weaver. I know who you all are. Let's just get right into it. I know you don't love a middle manager like me coming in, making life hard.
Hal is a micromanager whose leadership comes in the form of inspirational quotes.
This is a quote from one of history's greatest managers, a fella named Jonathan Rockefeller. Good management consists of showing average people how to do the work of superior people. He got it. Weaver, that's a good one for you. Maybe write it down or something.
After a while, the crew gets sick of him being around and decide to strike against Hal and the company.
Explosive activity. Monitoring. Deposit accepted.
Gunner, remember what our objective is here.
Salvage mark.
You, 52? Really? You're gonna let yourself be taken in by these clowns?
Hal has a complete meltdown and says things that shouldn't be said on a recorded line.
We'll drive you into the ground with death. We'll give you work so dangerous you'll revive 20 times a day until your DNA comes apart at the seams. And when you come back as a useless, gibbering blob, we'll make your family pick up the bill.
That audio clip makes it to the public, number goes down, and the Stellar Commission steps in. The Commission recognizes the Cutters Union and it's back to business for the Cutters. If at this point you've tactically acquired the parts needed for your own ship and have the funds, you can formally end the game. I did skip over a lot of dialogue, but it's all the same. Big company bad, worker good. If you've ever worked a regular job and have listened to coworkers complain about shitty, lower level management, then you've experienced the story. Is Hardspace Shipbreaker a good game? This one's honestly a tough one to answer. On one hand, you have a title that accomplishes what it set out to do by presenting a very possible futuristic job. On the other hand, the repetitive gameplay and lack of meaningful content makes it feel hollow and borderline unfinished. If this had Steam Workshop or mod support and an actual ship creator, I think it would be talked about a lot more than what it is currently. At its core, it is a fun experience, but there's just not a lot there. Should you give it a try? This one's a tough one too. Even if this were 10 or 20 bucks full price, it would still cost too much money. While it looks great and plays fine, I don't think there's enough here to recommend it at all. It's the very definition of a one and done, and mod support could have prevented that. I feel bad for saying that because honestly, hard work went into making it, but it simply underdelivers. Hardspace Shipbreaker is a job simulator-like game that captures the idea of decommissioning spaceships. And while it does that very well, the lack of content is ultimately its downfall. While it can be fun and engaging for the first few hours, the latter half of the game struggles to impress. Monotonous jobs are boring, even futuristic ones.